So today with me, I have Dr. Fabian Sandoval, who is an eminent researcher, clinical researcher and physician. I'm delighted to introduce Yasmeem Watson, who is a patient who has actually participated in clinical research and can share her experience. And also Gangotra, who is a caregiver and has been actively involved in her daughter's journey through clinical research. I wanted to ask you specifically about your care team, Fabian, and how do you ensure that your care team have the trust of their patients? You know, your team in clinical research. Do you have a certain number of your staff that are from Hispanic background? Do you make sure that people who don't have cultural training? How do you handle ensuring that the people that are in your care team understand the needs of the community they're serving?
Because I rule with the iron fist, Claire. Because so my staff, they're all bilingual. I would say 90% of them speak at least a second language. And from the time they pick up the phone to speak with the patient, I remind our staff, tell the patient, if you're not a legal resident, it's okay. If you don't have insurance, it's okay. And you can come to a safe environment. And I think when we tell that to our patients, it eases their burden, right? When we say to the patients, we'll be here early, we'll send you a car, and we'll give you a little compensation to make up for that lost work time, that eases their burden. If it means we go to your house and deliver the medications, we will do that. It's those types of things that have helped our patients stay engaged in our studies, because my staff kind of follows the lead of leadership, right? If they see that I take the time to do a patient, they also learn to take the time with patients. If they see me running in and out, they're going to do the same thing, right? They emulate leadership. So it has to come from top down.
There's a couple of things that I want to pull out there that you mentioned, Fabian. First is that your care team and the team in your research institute reflect the diversity of the population that they're serving, and that's really, really critical. I think the other piece that you picked up on that I'd like to go on to, because I think there are three key areas for me in terms of barriers to participation in clinical research. I think the first is sort of the challenges around medical and scientific barriers, and those are really outlined by the inclusion-exclusion criteria, right? There's not much we can do with that. Then there are the behavioural, cultural pieces, which I think we've talked about a lot here, which a lot of the time boil down to trust and being able to have those conversations with the people that you need and get the information that you need to be able to move beyond concerns that you may have and trust in that service that your care team are providing you. And then the third area, which you've just touched on, are those logistical barriers that I think could be very easy for us to remove. And you talked a little bit about things like, the location distance and supporting people getting to the sites and maybe taking the research to the patients themselves. So I just wanted to touch with Elia first. Elia, do you have experience of elements that supported you and your family in accessing clinical research? Did you have particular logistical barriers that were either solved or not for you, and what would have helped you to participate more in clinical research?
First of all, I'm an aging carer, so I have my own medical issues. So I would personally, if things are made easier for me as much as possible, then that would help. So for us, the length of time spent traveling, our normal appointment time to go to the specialist centre involves a round trip of 6 hours. And that's, we drive to the centre. And again, so that's dependent on the traffic. Then there's the length of time you spend at the research centre. Then there's also the number of visits that they want you to make. So if these visits can be cut to a minimum, then it's very useful. Then as Fabian mentioned, the expenses. Does it include travel? Does it include food? Does it include childcare? If patients are given the option for travel, for example, taxis, buses, trains, car, and they're given the choice of what is the most convenient to the patient, that we find is very useful. So, and the other thing is, how are the expenses paid? Does the patient have to pay them up front and wait to be reimbursed? Or are they even being reimbursed, right? So that there could be a financial barrier, because not everybody can afford to pay up front and then perhaps wait for a while until they're reimbursed, or if they're not being reimbursed, and then again there's a financial barrier. Then the other barrier is, consider if the patients and the caregivers are working. For example, at one of my daughter's workplaces, they had to make up the time that you spent for your medical appointments. So for her, if she spent a whole day, which is what was required, then it would mean that she would have to somehow make that whole day up. And the only way that she would be able to do that would be to take time out of her annual leave. And I don't think that's really ideal.
No.
At all.
No, it's not.
It's not.
It's not at all, is it? Those are huge barriers that you've just mentioned. You know, like you said, for working individuals where there's a strong family support mechanism as well, that could be 2 or 3 individuals having to take a whole day. I mean, 6 hours in a car is huge. Anything we can do that would enable you to maybe have a nurse come to your home, or maybe be able to perform some of those assessments, maybe even yourself remotely, you know, things like simple assessments, weight, height, blood pressure, those sorts of things. I think maybe would that help? Would you be confident and comfortable doing some of those in the home, or at another local practitioner, like maybe a pharmacy or something like that?
That does help. And one of the things that has helped us is, for example, for one of the treatments, we used to have to make that trip to go for infusions. And that, as I said, it involved a whole day. And now what's happened is that they've come up with a self-injectable injection. So that has really transformed our lives, because we're not making that journey every 2 months we had to make that journey.
Marvelous.
If I recall.
Wonderful.
So yes, sometimes remote monitoring helps, and it's good, but then when you look at it from cultural point of view, from the South Asian point of view, the Asians like to look after themselves, and they don't discuss medical issues even amongst the immediate family. We're the exception to the rule, or even the extended family. So if they have an HCP coming to their house, they may not actually like it. So in some cases, remote monitoring may not, there's a barrier to remote monitoring if the HCPs are coming to the house.
Yeah. Thank you. That's really helpful, Elia. Thank you. I think you've really displayed there some of the challenges, and it's not there is no one size fits all, is there? It's about flexibility and providing options, I think. And I'd really love to bring Yasmeem into that conversation. Your experience, Yasmeem, what would have helped you overcome, did you experience significant logistical issues and challenges? And what would have helped you overcome those in your situation?
So the barriers for me were not logistical or inclusion barriers. They were before the trial even starts. Wow. It's the lack of trust within the medical community, and then the cultural bias along with that, meaning that within my community, we don't trust the medical system. So in terms of bringing clinical research to my family, it wasn't really a conversation that was up for discussion because the lack of trust. And so when you don't have the lack of trust for the medical community, we're not going to trust you to do experimentation, for lack of a better word, within a clinical trial. So I wanted to make the informed decision on my own about participating in a clinical trial. I didn't want the cultural biases or the trust issues to become a barrier in me making an informed decision. So I basically did it on my own, but I think culturally, again, our barriers begin before we even decide if we're going to become included into a clinical trial. So we don't even experience the logistical or the other barriers because we're not even in the trial to experience that. We haven't even gotten that far within the trial. We're automatically saying no at the door without even walking through, figuring out what's ahead. Mm-hmm. And so the transparency is what we need from the medical community in terms of, being honest about the past medical atrocities and bringing them to the forefront and saying, hey, and being open and honest, I know you experienced this, but in order for us to move science forward, we have to do this. And so I think if it's presented a different way, we can defeat that barrier.
That's really helpful insight in the importance of acknowledging history and historical events in those conversations and saying, we understand that you will be hesitant in maybe participating in research, but here's some areas for you that you could go away and research this for yourself and get independent information. Would that have been, are you suggesting that would be a helpful way to approach maybe a conversation with the African American community, because there has been historical events that really have caused major issues in trust there for that community, hasn't there?
Acknowledgement is big. There has to be acknowledgement. If we're going to bridge this gap between the medical community and my community, or diverse communities and populations in total, you have to discuss these issues. These things have happened and people have not forgotten about them, and they have to be acknowledged. But we also have to discuss the importance of being involved in clinical trials. Oftentimes I'm at conferences and different things, and I'm speaking with individuals and I'm asking them, so you have this trial, but what is your diversity within that trial? And it's like a deer caught in the headlights. Oh, well, our numbers, well, your numbers only include Caucasian women or Caucasian men. So if you're an Asian male or an African-American woman, you're not included within this trial. So how do I know that this medication is going to work for me? You have to bring everyone into these trials.
I absolutely agree. And it's really interesting. I don't know if you know, but FDA do produce a snapshot report now, and they've recently issued the 2020 report, which looks at all the drugs that were approved in 2020 and the makeup of, women, men, race, ethnicity, age. And I think it's really powerful data to show that we are looking at that now. We are measuring that now. And it's important that as we move forward, we continue to measure. But I really take your point on board about acknowledgement of historical events. And it's important, I think, that principal investigators and PIs are educated, if they're not aware of those historical events, that they are educated on those to be able to have those open, transparent conversations, like you said, Yasmeem.
And I think COVID has helped. COVID has helped because COVID affects the masses, and people have this mass hysteria. And so now people are wanting to do their own research, and they're watching CNN now and figuring out, oh my gosh, what's happening? So now people are kind of understanding how a medication is approved. So I think COVID has helped have that conversation around the dinner table. So I think people are going to be more informed when we come out of this. So I think that's going to be a step forward.
It's definitely a silver lining in that whole big cloud of a pandemic, isn't it? That there is a lot more awareness now around research and the importance of effective representation within that research of all different groups, whether that's race and ethnicity, because we've seen differences in the disease in that setting. Age, again, we've seen differences, that middle-aged male, slightly elevated BMI population that, again, doesn't do so well.
It's also raised the point about mistrust, because there's all this advertising going on about the take-up of the COVID vaccine. In certain communities, it hasn't happened, and it hasn't happened because of the mistrust that is between the communities and the Western medicines and the HCPs. And so COVID has really brought up all these points.
Absolutely, it has. You're so right, Elia, and just really demonstrated to us, Elia, that we really do need to do more in that trust setting that both you and Yasmeem have talked about, to really bring the community and research together in a much better way. I think we've learned a lot during today's discussion. Key points that I would like to take away and that I would love to just recap for the audience are that really time for our physicians and care teams to talk with patients and to discuss with patients is really, really critical. So anything we can do within the industry to ensure that physicians have more time, and also that there is effective information in multiple formats available for that conversation and for patients to share outside of that conversation and to digest further with family is really, really important. We also heard about the importance of the care team at site being representative of the community that they're serving and really understanding what patients want and need. And then we also heard about some of the logistical challenges that we discussed earlier around time and access to the sites and travel times and the burden for patients in terms of participating in research. Before we wrap up, though, I would like to come back to the panel with one question. And my question for each of you is this. If there was one thing that you would request of industry who are in our audience now to act upon to really improve the representation of different groups within clinical research, what would that be? What would be your one ask? And I'm going to come to Yasmeem first for that. Yasmeem, what would be your one request for people?
That we build on the momentum that COVID has built. People, again, are intrigued by research and clinical trials, and they're using those terms now. So if the medical community as a whole can use this momentum to propel research forward and keep these conversations going even after the vaccination, so that people can understand how clinical trial affects all diseases and all illnesses, then I think we'll be moving forward the way that we should be.
That's amazing. Thank you, Yasmeem. I couldn't agree more. Ela, I'll come to you now. What would be your one request of industry? Here's your opportunity for the audience.
Oh, gosh. Industry has to recognize that not only the patients are involved, but also embrace the caregivers and their families, and that long-lasting relationships has to be built with the relevant healthcare organizations, patient leaders, caregiver leaders. And this can be achieved by not only educating the patients, their families and caregivers, but also educating the HCPs and the industry about the importance of cultural sensitivities.
That's wonderful, thank you. Such a critically important point, again, for gaining the trust and ensuring that patients have the information that they need to support those conversations with families. And then finally to Dr. Fabian, you have immense experience. I'm sure there's plenty of things that you have probably already asked of the industry, but what would be your one request today?
I think part of that reminder is a simple one, that we need to be proactive and not reactive. The sponsors as a whole should not wait for that particular study to do something, right? Start building that momentum. Start working with us on getting the word out on the importance, right? Do the proper marketing. Work with us on doing this marketing so that people know what research is when it's their turn to actually receive this document to sign this consent form. And with that said, make sure that the consent forms, the ask is, make sure that your consent forms, before you even start looking for sites and are getting ready to, go ahead and have them in the target language of those areas that you're going to be working with, so that you don't waste time from the site side waiting to receive those consent forms in Spanish. And the same goes for the e-diaries or the paper diaries, that you have those patient-facing documents already in some of those common target languages, because you're wasting time doing that. And part of this is to say, don't waste it. Don't waste your time. Start doing it. Don't say that you're going to have a diversity program and really just have one person on there. Have a team. And then the last thing I ask is, call me and help sponsor our TV show, because we need to keep spreading the word.
Awesome plug for yourself there. Well done, Fabian. Well, do you know what? I think that is incredible, because the things that all three of you mentioned there really, to me, can be summed up in that we need to capitalize on the opportunity that we have that's come out of COVID, and ensure that the whole world, and that is the whole world, not parts of it, are talking about research and understand how important it is. So whether that's patients, whether that's patients' families, whether that's people from China to the US, different cultural groups and different ages, we need to make sure that everybody is talking about research and understands it. So I want to issue a huge thank you to every one of the panelists today. I think they've all been absolutely tremendous. Thank you so much for your support and your input. I think it's been very valuable for our audience, and I hope that those takeaways that we've just discussed will be taken away by the audience and acted upon. So thanks, everybody.